I was recently told about a past tradition here at this church when the last sermon of the year would pay homage to some of the noted humanitarians who had died that year. The more I thought about that idea, the more I liked it, and I thought I would try my hand at something similar. But first, you've probably had a sneaking suspicion that it's not really a sermon by Scott until there's at least one musical theater reference. So let's go ahead and get those out of the way. Near the beginning of the first act of Matilda the musical, the title character wonders why famous literary characters simply allow their stories to unfold without taking the initiative to change an unpleasant ending. She sings, "Just because you find that life's not fair, it doesn't mean that you just have to grin and bear it. If you always take it on the chin and wear it, you might as well be saying you think that it's okay. And that's not right. And if it's not right, you have to put it right." Or, in other words, as we learned in the Muppet movie, life's like a movie. Write your own ending. The Act Two finale of the Pulitzer Prize-winning Broadway musical Hamilton is the song, "Who lives, who dies, who tells your story?" Throughout, the characters from the show, who, unlike Hamilton, lived long enough to hear their stories told, step forward and express respect, sometimes begrudgingly, for Hamilton. They wonder, no matter how intentionally someone crafts their legacy, who is it that will tell your story after you're gone? This year, 215 years after the death of Hamilton, we again have no shortage of luminaries who crafted the stories of their lives, wrote their own endings, then passed away to hand over their stories and legacies to be told by those who come after them. Obviously, I couldn't begin to talk about all those we've lost who made the world a better place. But as I was drawn to individuals, their stories began to fall into categories. Those who nurtured and protected our world's most vulnerable. Those who fought for justice and democracy, poets and writers, and those who broke barriers. So allow me to both begin and end with poets. Good poets have the ability to describe what we once thought was mundane with such detail and emotion that it's almost as if we had never observed the thing before. We see the world anew. As South African poet Sandile Dekeni, who died in November, wrote, "They say it is not by bread alone that we live. I know it is by poetry alone that we survive." One of our readings earlier was Circles by the amazing poet Mary Oliver, a favorite of Unitarian Universalists and poetry lovers of all faith traditions. It is common to hear her poems read from UU pulpits. Now, on March 15th, it will be 1 year since the passing of Pulitzer Prize and National Book Award winner and 17th U.S. Poet Laureate W.S. Merwin. One of his most well-known poems is entitled, "For the Anniversary of My Death." It reads, "Every year, without knowing it, I have passed the day when the last fires will wave to me, and the silence will set out, tireless traveler, like the beam of a lightless star. Then I will no longer find myself in life as in a strange garment, surprised at the earth and the love of one woman and the shamelessness of men, as today, riding after 3 days of rain, hearing the wrens sing and the falling cease, and bowing, not knowing to what." William Stanley Merwin lived for many years abroad and later studied Zen Buddhism. In the 1980s and 90s, his writing influence derived from that interest in Buddhism philosophy and deep ecology. He wrote more than 50 books of poetry and prose, from early works inspired by myths and legends to fiery protests against environmental destruction, nuclear weapons, and the conflict in Vietnam. Residing on an old pineapple plantation in a rural part of Maui, in a solar-powered house he designed, he wrote prolifically and was dedicated to the restoration of the island's rainforests. The continued existence of wildlife and wilderness is important to the quality of life of humans. Our challenge for the future is that we realize we are very much a part of the Earth's ecosystem, and we must learn to respect and live according to the basic biological laws of nature. That quote is by another champion of protecting the environment, zoologist and TV personality Jim Fowler, who died in May. Fowler rose to fame as a staple of the long-running nature program Wild Kingdom. Starting as an assistant, Fowler later became co-host with Marlin Perkins before taking over as host. His athletic prowess would serve him well during the show's 25-year run, whether it was outrunning gorillas and wildcats or wrestling an anaconda. Fowler made 40 appearances on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, bringing various wild animals on the show. And if you like to laugh, please look for those on YouTube. I did yesterday, and they're so funny. We honor those who stood up for the precious wilderness and its inhabitants, the wildlife, as well as those who advocated for and nurtured some of our most vulnerable individuals, children. Edward Ziegler was a pioneer in the application of developmental psychology to social policy. He helped create the Head Start program for disadvantaged preschoolers, which has served more than 32 million children since 1965. In addition to his groundbreaking work during the Johnson administration's War on Poverty, Ziegler created the U.S. Office of Child Care during the Nixon administration and helped to construct the Family and Medical Leave Act. Ziegler asks, where are our priorities? We keep saying you have to invest in human capital. Investing in human capital means good health for our young children, and it means preschool education for our children. Preschool children lost the originator of a dear friend this year, puppeteer Carol Spinney, the creator of Sesame Street's Big Bird. As the lovable, whimsical, giant, flightless bird, Spinney became a friend to generations of children, a slightly goofy but joyful and optimistic character who would learn lessons right alongside them. According to the CBS News website, Spinney told about a phone call he had made to a 5-year-old boy named Joey, sick with cancer. The boy's father later told Spinney that his son, who hadn't smiled in a month, passed away with a smile on his face thanks to Big Bird's call. In Joey's final moment, described the father to Spinney. Joey said, "Big Bird called me. He's my friend." Many famous people have visited Sesame Street, including those with ties to politics. First Ladies Michelle Obama, Barbara Bush, and Laura Bush, and Associate Justice of the Supreme Court Sonia Sotomayor all visited Big Bird and his friends. And unfortunately, both the legislative and judicial branches lost important members in 2019. Former Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens was known for his fierce independence, old-fashioned geniality, and trademark bow tie. During his nearly 35 years on the bench, Stevens gradually transformed from a moderate conservative to a leading liberal voice. "I don't really think I've changed. I think there have been a lot of changes in the court," Stevens said in 2010. But the justice who began his Supreme Court years as a critic of affirmative action and a supporter of the death penalty shifted his views substantially, to the point that Stevens declared in 2008 that he believed the death penalty is unconstitutional. He dissented in both Bush v. Gore, the 2000 case that ended Florida's recount and anointed George W. Bush as president, and the 2010 Citizens United, when the court lifted restrictions on spending by corporations and unions to sway elections. His decisions, in part, helped promote racial equality and gay rights, and he became a strong proponent of abortion rights, consumer protection, and limits on the death penalty. I may be dancing with the angels when all of this is corrected, but I gotta tell you, we must fight for our democracy, said Representative Elijah Cummings. In February, when, as chairman of the powerful House Oversight Committee, he oversaw investigations into President Trump's business dealings and campaign finance violations and their intersections with government actions. He denounced the president's immigration policy that separated parents and children at the border, and in his final hours signed subpoenas demanding the administration hand over documents pertaining to its controversial decision to deport children with life-threatening health issues, dooming them to death. We are in a fight for the soul of our democracy, and you've got to understand that, Cummings told 60 Minutes. This is serious business. Freedom of the press is not just important to democracy, it is democracy, wrote journalist Walter Cronkite, who died 10 years ago. An award-winning journalist whom we lost this year was Cokie Roberts. The daughter of politicians, both her father and mother served in the House of Representatives. She grew up with a keen understanding of politics during the 1940s and 50s. She became a pioneering broadcast journalist who chronicled Washington for NPR, PBS, and ABC News, the rare female voice among the most prominent media figures in D.C. From 1996 to 2002, Roberts co-anchored the ABC Sunday political show This Week with Sam Donaldson, and later settled into the role of analyst and commentator. During her career, she won 3 Emmy Awards, and in 1990, she received the Edward R. Murrow Award for Outstanding Contributions to Public Radio. She also wrote several best-selling books, and as Benjamin Franklin told us, if you would not be forgotten as soon as you are dead, either write something worth reading or do something worth writing. 2 people whose writings will live on long after they're gone are Rachel Held Evans and Toni Morrison. While you very well may know the second name, you may not know the first, although we who went to seminary certainly do. Rachel Held Evans was a popular progressive Christian author who died far too young. She wrote about faith, doubt, and life in the Bible Belt, according to her website. With a devout following on social media, she argued against the doctrine espoused by the evangelical movement, such as she witnessed growing up in an evangelical household, and challenged the church community by addressing its attitudes towards sexism, racism, and the LGBTQ community. In her books, Held Evans debated the political parameters of the culture wars that she believed were dividing and consuming the faith-based and proselytized that Christianity must be inclusive of all people. She drew plenty of criticism from both sides of the religious spectrum over differences in doctrine and prayer. In 1993, Toni Morrison was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, the first African American woman ever so honored. As part of her Nobel acceptance speech, she said, "Language alone protects us from the scariness of things with no names. Language alone is meditation." The author of dark, often heartbreaking books about the Black experience in America, Morrison created elegant, emotional works about the parameters of love and freedom in a society scarred by racism. She won the Pulitzer Prize in 1988 for Beloved, in which a mother loved her children so much she was willing to kill them rather than see them return to slavery. Two other American women of color who broke barriers were Diahann Carroll and Jessye Norman. The international opera star Jessye Norman grew up in Augusta, Georgia, singing in church and around a musical family that included pianists and singers. She made her operatic debut in 1969 in Berlin and wowed audiences around the world on stages in Milan, London, and New York. Renowned for her performances in Carmen, Aida, and Wagner's Ring Cycle, and for her interpretations of Lieder by Brahms, Mahler, and Strauss, Norman was not limited to opera or classical music. She also performed spirituals and songs by Duke Ellington, Cole Porter, and George and Ira Gershwin. Pigeonholing is only interesting to pigeons, she stated. Norman also gave back, raising funds to help students attend school, championing the arts in schools, and promoting diversity. In 2003, the Jessye Norman School of the Arts opened in Augusta to provide a free fine arts education to disadvantaged children. In 1962, Diahann Carroll became the first African American actress to win a Tony Award for a leading role in a musical in the 1962 Richard Rodgers show No Strings. In 1974, she also earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress for Claudine. But she was perhaps best known for her pioneering work on the late 60s sitcom Julia. Carroll played Julia Baker, a nurse whose husband had been killed in Vietnam. Although not the first Black woman to star in her own TV show, she was the first to star as someone other than a servant. Later, in the 1980s, she joined the long-running primetime soap opera Dynasty as Dominique Devereaux, the glamorous half-sister of Blake Carrington. Well, glamorous or not, we are all capable of contributing to the world in a way that makes a profound difference. A rare few go big, make the big gesture, but most of us take a different yet equally valid path. It's the path of the ripple. Many of us in this room have lost someone dear to them this year. Some made the big gesture, some a ripple. Spouses, life partners, family members, dear friends. The congregation has lost a beloved former minister, Bob Shibley. They are all etched into our minds and memories. We are left to reflect upon, learn from, and tell their stories. Inspirational author Shannon Alder wrote, "Carve your names on hearts, not tombstones. A legacy is etched into the minds of others and the stories they share about you. Who lives? Who dies? Who tells your story? They tell your story upon whose hearts you have carved your name. They tell your story upon whose minds your legacy was etched. They feel the ripple of you deciding to change your story for the better, to write your own ending. We are all capable of contributing to the world in a way that makes a profound difference. I began by paying homage to a poet and end the same way, with Mary Oliver's When Death Comes. When death comes like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me, and snaps the purse shut, when death comes like the measles pox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood, and I look upon time as no more than an idea. And I consider eternity as another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy, and as singular. And each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending, as all music does, towards silence. And each body a lion of courage, and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of arguments. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. Amen.